Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is an empty chair because the teacup is doing tea things again. Who would have thought? There is also no CEO next to me because he's also busy roaming the estate. But I'm not alone. Here with me from across the pond, author, student, Shanti Hershenson, and returning guest. I forgot to say that as well. Hello, Shanti, and welcome back on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you. And like I said before we started the recording, you have been awfully busy since we met last time. So tell us what you have been doing all the time, apart from getting time management right, of course.
So, of course, I have been writing a lot. I don't remember which book I was promoting the last time we spoke, but there's definitely been a few books that have released before them. By a few, I mean a lot. In the last several months at least, actually just the last year. So of 2023, I just published my third book of 2023, and then I have a date for the fourth one. So it's going to actually be a very fruitful year for me. Usually I've done around 3 books per year, but now I guess we're up to 4, so it's pretty cool. And the first one was the Bane of Angelfall Academy, which I think is the book that we're focusing on. And that was a really interesting book to write because I wrote it when I was in 8th grade and I just started 10th grade. And then the second book I published is Biome Blackout. It's a sequel to Biome Lock. No one cares about Biome Lock. We don't need to talk about Biome Lock. Mostly a joke. And then I have Helipads in Heaven, which just came out on October 15th. And it's already one of my top selling books. It's doing extremely well. And I'm really excited to see how it's going to go.
I'm blown away. You can tell. I'm completely speechless. I think the book we spoke about when we first met was Biome Lock, I think. That was the one we spoke about.
I think so.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And since you're so prolific, no wonder. It's not that long ago that we spoke, but still, you have been writing. So the Bane of Angelfall Academy. What is it about? Tell our listeners everything you can tell because we do not want to give anything away, of course.
So the Bane of Angelfall Academy is a book. It takes place a couple years in the future, and it's about this girl. Her name's Devin, and her parents are these extremely famous writers. And what happens is there's this new prestigious boarding school, and it's for the most talented young writers in the world. And she gets in. Her parents are famous, so they're just gonna let her in, and her parents helped fund the school and stuff. But she loves writing, but there's so much pressure on her that she is just completely behind all of her classmates. She hasn't written anything significant. She hasn't won a writing contest since she was in 3rd grade, and it was a school contest. So she's really completely just lost. And she has to navigate the prestigious student body and all of the technology they have to try to what's the word I'm looking for? Enrich the students' writing. And a lot of the technology, she's this is kind of strange. I don't know if this actually really works. And as she's trying to figure all of this out, the characters from her book start coming to life, and they're begging her to finish the story. And as the main character from the book she's starting to write comes to life, so does the villain. So now, not only does she have this school she has to navigate, not only does she have to survive the normal struggles of being in 6th grade, but also she has to save the universe.
I got the impression that it is set in the future. It sounds a bit futuristic, the book, although it says at the beginning it's 2023-24. But given the fact that there has been a lot of change where, let's say, for example, AI is concerned or ChatGPT, I mean, this also still sounds quite futuristic for most people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And what about your use of ChatGPT? I mean, since we are talking about writers in a near future, more or less, do you think, or is it for you, changing as a writer? Will it change? How might it change?
That's a good question. So I'd say I don't use ChatGPT very much. If I do, I use it, I'll test it. I'll be write this. Really, I don't think ChatGPT is at a level where it can really replace human writers in anything more than blog posts, but also I don't think I would ever personally use it because I enjoy writing my own stuff. But if you like really look at it, and I was just telling someone about this the other day, it's like ChatGPT, you can really, at least most writers, I feel like, are able to, you can tell like when something has been written by ChatGPT. I think it has a very specific writing style. It feels like extremely average, if that makes sense. And it's like, it can be easy to tell. And I also don't think the writing is like very good, very groundbreaking, Like personally, I kind of have trouble reading like what ChatGPT writes. Like even if you make it like write like a short story, because it's like it's boring, it doesn't have the emotion that human writers have. And of course, there's a chance one day ChatGPT is going to be able to like learn all of these new writing devices. But at least right now, it can't. So I don't feel terribly like, oh no, this is gonna like replace me. Although I do notice, there are a lot of authors whose books have been used to train ChatGPT, and I feel like that's not okay.
You're not afraid that you will be replaced by ChatGPT in the near future?
Yeah, like I don't think it's going to change much for writers. I mean, actually already it is changing a lot, and it's changing how we have to think about it. But in terms of like, just overall the writing process, my writing process has been the same. I don't, really use ChatGPT. I don't need to. And I feel like I just, it's not at the level where it can write sufficiently yet. But also I know there are a lot of authors whose books have been used to train ChatGPT, and personally, like, I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
So there is like kind of a serious like ethical problem with it because, writers should be able to volunteer to have their books used, but they shouldn't be used like without their permission.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is completely different in your book, because in your book, like you said, we have this academy. It's all about writing. It's all about helping young authors to grow, to learn the craft, and to support each other. And tell me about, where did you find, or where did you get the idea? Where did you find your heroine, of course, and what more or less inspired you to create this special academy for young writers?
So Angelfall Academy, at least the initial idea of it, came from two different places. I don't necessarily remember what I was thinking when I came up with the idea for the actual like writing themed school. I remember I wrote it in my like notes app probably when I was in like 7th grade. So I was like 12 or 13. I was like, hey, this could be a good idea for a next book. And then I didn't really think of it until I think I was in like 8th grade. And what I remember is I had this dream. And in this dream, I was like, there was like this monster, and I was in this really futuristic boarding school. And when I woke up, I wrote all of it down. And then I thought like, hey, this could make a good like setting for that, school of writing. And then from there, I think that's where I really decided, like, okay, I should do this. And just really from there, like all of this brainstorming, I kind of just kept going. But I don't necessarily remember exactly what I was thinking or what made me, like, have the idea.
And your main character, your heroine, she's not you, because you keep on writing and writing.
Yeah, in some ways, she's, like, the opposite of me. She likes writing, but she also, like, doesn't really know, like, if it's the right thing for her. She's, like, she kind of cracks under the pressure instead of, like, thriving in it. She's also just adorable. Like, really, she's one of my favorite, like, narrators. I have a lot of characters, but I really loved the way she kind of told the story and how it all, like, kind of played out in her point of view, because she's 12, so it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought of writing this book in the first person?
I did, actually. It was something that I really contemplated for a while, because in some ways, like, especially with the younger characters, first person can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I even had someone say, like, oh, you should have written it in first person. But at the same time, I feel like everything going on in the book is so complex that would be hard to explain with the first person. Because even though, the main character is really young, I can still kind of get away with explaining more in third person than I would in first person. Because she wouldn't necessarily, if she was just narrating, like, I did this and I think this, like, it would be a little harder for her to explain, like, all of the kind of complicated things that go on in the book.
Now the hard question, because although you're very young, and again, you've written quite a lot of books now, what about change of perspectives then, or person? Since there are a lot of books out there that use first person in one chapter and a third person in the other. Would have that been an option for you?
Probably not, because I didn't see like any of the other. Actually, one of the reasons why I didn't do any of the other characters as point of view characters was because I was worried I would end up like spoiling like a plot twist or something. But at the same time, it's like really, because there's a lot of characters, but the story is really Devon's story more than anyone else. Like, it's not Byron's story or like anyone else's story as much as hers. So it would almost take away from her impact if I had another character's point of view in there.
At the beginning of the book, I got the impression that she feels a teeny tiny bit like a fraud when she goes to the academy.
Definitely.
Yeah. And like you said, she feels the pressure. The pressure not only from going to this academy, but also, I suppose, from the fact that her whole family are writers. I mean, the challenge or what she is worried about is the fact that her whole family are writers. It's not just the pressure that is put on her by going to the school, but also the fact that her mom, her dad, they write. Her younger brother also writes. And now she feels like, oh, come on, what about me? I have all these millions, trillions of ideas in my head, but I can't seem to put them on paper.
Yeah, I think in some ways, like, it's more so her parents than the school in the way that, like, they are arguably like some of the most successful writers in the world, and her brother is probably on the way to that. And all the kids, I guess also, the success of the kids at her school also really would impact her because they're also on their way to being like extremely famous, and she's kind of just there. And she really wants to achieve that. But she has to learn to not let everyone else's achievements like get in the way. And like in some ways though, she also does deal with a very regular writer struggle of like, oh, I don't know, I can't put my ideas on paper, but I have so many. And I know so many writers that just like they have like a million ideas and maybe they can only get a few sentences down, maybe they can't get down anything at all. So in some ways, it's like a really relatable struggle put in the backdrop of like this crazy, world where like there are a bunch of young, talented writers and this futuristic school, and her parents are famous.
And I got the impression that you yourself have got quite a few millions, trillions ideas in your head, and you do not, you are not stuck in one genre in this book. Because when you start out with the story, as a reader, you get the impression, okay, this is the story of this girl, and it's a sort of coming of age, and she's growing into her role as a writer. But at the same time, when further on in the book, you more or less, correct me if I'm wrong, have a sort of change of heart, a teeny tiny bit. I'm not criticizing, just stating my impression that you're going more to the tiny bit of sci-fi in the story.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it kind of starts out as like this like little kind of cute, like, oh, she's like figuring herself out, and all of a sudden her figuring herself out gets a little more complicated because she has to do so amid like this whole crazy monster and these characters that are coming to life and like jumping universes. And I do think like towards the end of the book, it does end up circling back to that. But yeah, it definitely goes from 1 to 100 extremely quickly.
It's not a bad thing, don't get me wrong. And I get the idea that for a certain age group, it's quite okay. I mean, forget about the whole adults writing because they are so, focused on this one thing. And God forbid you should, look left or right sometimes. But I got the impression when we speak to other authors who write young adult fiction that it's a bit easier in this age bracket to change genres, you know what I mean? I mean, not change completely, but put in other ideas as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, especially, I think this book is more enjoyable for like a much younger like YA audiences too. So it's like you can really kind of do all of this crazy stuff and sort of like get away with it.
Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, it's also okay for us adults when we read this kind of stories, because personally, I often enjoy reading young adult fiction because of the different ideas. Because like I said, adult authors, they are they stuck to one genre and they rarely leave the path. And it's often also for, I suppose, publishers. It's sometimes easier for people who are independent.
Yeah, like I also find it like a lot more fun to like incorporate all of these different ideas and have them work together and have the characters like go through all of these crazy things, but still also kind of have that like human experience that kind of like, I don't know how to explain it, like is still like kind of realistic, but then also have all these like unrealistic things happen and watch how they kind of like come together.
And do you feel or do you think that you are on the way of finding your genre? Not saying you should stuck to one genre, of course not. But is it, since we last spoke, clearer to you which genre you prefer as a writer, do you think?
If anything, it's less clear now. Back then, like I was writing like only sci-fi, only dystopian, and like yeah, sure, dystopian's kind of fun, but also now I'm writing in so many different genres. So, for example, like the book I just published is like sci-fi, but it's also I think more contemporary. It kind of uses time travel as like a device, but the time travel is not very like a very heavy part of the book. And then one of the last books I wrote was like another, it was the third book in a dystopian series. So in some ways I'm still doing that. But also then the book I wrote after that was this like contemporary character versus nature novel about this girl who gets lost in the mountains. And then the book I'm writing right now is like a very, YA high school book. So if anything, I'm like expanding genres a lot more than I was a couple years ago. But also, like, in some ways, I'm kind of using it to really discover what I like to write best. But also, like, I'm the kind of writer who, like, I will totally, like, mix genres and do all of these crazy things. So really, I think I'm never going to have a concrete genre as much as I'm going to write in, like, every single genre imaginable and then have all these different readers who like all these different things.
And another advantage is if you stay independent, you don't get pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Because I think that what happens to a lot of writers, not just let's say those who are with a publishing house, but others as well, they do it to themselves sometimes. But I think it's good if you say, I'm keep changing genres. Why not?
Yeah, because I don't want to be stuck writing only one thing for my entire life because I think that would be boring. And also, like, as a writer, it's just so much fun to just experiment with everything. And to find, like, to learn about, like, how to write all these different things. And that's really, like, the most enjoyable part of it for me. And one of them is just, like, getting to, like, experience so many different things and, like, the learning process. Because really, like, it's a different kind of experience with every single book I write.
Mm-hmm.
But even more so with when they're, like, in different genres.
And having read the first one we spoke about and this one now, I really got the impression that you have really grown as a writer.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
For the reader, it is noticeable for the reader. And what would you say from your point of view? How did this growing process happen and what did you do to grow as a writer?
If I'm being honest, the one thing I really did to, like, grow as a writer was just keep writing. If you look at, like, my first book, so, like, Biomlock, Zao Lane, even, like, You Won't Know Her Name, compared to, like, my books now, it's so different. And really what just happened was with every single book, maybe the style was slightly different or I tried something new that I thought would really improve the writing. And then what worked and what I really liked, I stuck with, and what didn't, I just didn't do anymore. And really, I think every couple books now, there's like a significant change and it's a significant improvement, usually. I'd say really like the breaking point, like the point where it really got good was with my Never Dying series when I really decided like, okay, I gotta stop with these long sentences once and for all. I'm gonna like really try to do a more kind of varying sentence structure. And I did. And then with the next book, and I think actually the next book was actually the Bane of Angelfall Academy, I really was like, okay, I'm going to do another book in third person, but this book is going to be a lot more kind of, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I feel like Angelfall does still have, like, a voice, if that makes any sense. Even though it's in third person, I feel like there is still a character's voice there. And with some of the newer ones, I was like, okay, I'm really going to work on improving the writing quality of like my first person. And so in some ways, as I'm writing, there's like some sort of stylistic goal I have in mind with each book.
We spoke about this, I mean, first person, third person, but staying in the perspective of one person is sometimes hard. I mean, at least it is for me, because I always know what I'm talking about, you know? How doesn't anyone else know what I'm talking about? How do you rein yourself in? Or how do you keep on checking yourself that, okay, wait a minute now, the reader is probably going lost if I'm not clear enough whose perspective I'm writing from.
So if I do have a book with multiple perspectives, I usually, and this is something I do now, it's not something I did a couple years ago. So if you look at like Unlock, like really the perspective might change like every scene break, but I never have it in the same scene. And that's important because head jumping is not typically very good. But what I do is now at least, I give the characters a whole chapter. And sometimes, so with like some of my newer books, for example, like I've alternated where I've had it be like because there's two main characters who are like the POV characters, and every other chapter is one of their point of views, and that is extremely helpful. Otherwise, and I really try to develop the voices too. So it's like even if you don't see the chapter heading up top with their name on it, which is something I always do, then you would be able to tell just based on the writing style. And the third thing I was going to say, I just already mentioned it, is I try to always have a subheading with the character's name. And I think that's also extremely helpful because it really kind of sets things up. And even if, there's a very different writing style per character, you make sure the reader knows. And that's especially helpful and important when you're writing in first person more so than third. Because in third person, you have the character's name everywhere. And you can say, like, this character did this and said this. But when you're in first person, it's all I. And if that's, of course, can be the same with every single character in the book who has a point of view, then you do need to have some sort of mention of who's narrating at the top for it to be the most helpful.
What is also quite hard, I mean, for a first-person narration is the person you're writing as first person, he or she can't be omniscient. I think that's also the hard part, because you have to keep in mind that this person can't know things that he or she hasn't experienced. It is sometimes easier with third person, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. That's one of the reasons why I wrote Angelfall in third person, was because I could get away with like slightly more and with the explanations and even like some of the comparisons and things. Then if it's in first person, like a 12-year-old can't be like, oh, this and that, it really, I don't think it would have been as strong of a story if it was in first person. And a lot of my books like that. And there are some of my books though where I'm like, oh, this needs to be in first person. For example, like the one I'm writing now, like I can't imagine it being in third person because you need that personal connection to the characters. And especially with, I think, my books that are like high school books or like really, like a lot of my YA books, I'm like, oh, well, this needs to be in first person because then the readers, especially when the characters are like teenagers, then they can really connect with them.
In this book, The Bane of Angelfall, I mean, your main character, I mean, even as an adult, I can absolutely relate to her. If you write yourself or have tried writing yourself, or even as a reader, you can absolutely relate to her. Although she's quite young, doesn't matter. But the doubts and, like I said before, the feeling of being a fraud, who hasn't experienced that?
Yeah, like really, I think Devin sort of encapsulates a lot of the universal struggles that writers experience, whether they're old or young, or even if they're accomplished or not. Like, I think I'm doing pretty well in terms of like success and in terms of my writing. I still have doubts all the time. I'm still like, oh, I don't know if this book is going to be good. I don't think people are going to enjoy this. And really, like, the only way to get through it is to keep writing. And I think Devin kind of shows us that. But also, it's hilarious because she's literally like a 12-year-old. She's in 6th grade, but she's so relatable. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said before that it is a utopian novel. Is it really? And why is it? I'm asking you also as a reader, of course, and especially as a representative of your age group. What is it about utopian literature that is so fascinating?
So I love the kind of utopian and like dystopian books, and I definitely think that, a lot of people are going to argue with me on this. Angelfall Academy is definitely one of the books that is like seldomly in that category. Like it's not as, like dystopian and utopian as like Never Dying or The Accidental Insurgent or even Biomlock. But if you look at the school and how everything is, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a perfect school. This is incredible. And then if you look through the surface, you're like, there's a lot going on here that's maybe not so great. And that is kind of, I think, a key theme and a key, like, storyline of, like, dystopian and, like, utopian novels is, like, everything's perfect until it's not.
Mm.
So it definitely has those qualities, although it's not as, like, blatant, like, dystopia or utopia as, like, a lot of my other books.
Mm. Do you think that maybe older teenagers, not your age group, people who are older, a teeny tiny bit, a few years, they tend more to enjoy dystopian novels? Because like I said, it's all dark and gloomy. Is it an age question?
I think a lot of teenagers, especially I think a lot of older teenagers, enjoy like dystopia, but also a lot of middle schoolers too.
Okay.
And because I feel like everyone had their middle school dystopian phase. I mean, everyone. I don't know anyone that didn't.
Can't remember.
And, like, I had my middle school dystopian phase was writing and the books I wrote rather than like what I read.
Mm-hmm.
And like I know, like, oh my gosh, I know so many people that was like the Hunger Games or Divergent. And I think really what's really appealing for young people is like that kind of theme of like rebellion. So, the reading the dystopia is like kind of the teenage rebellion for kids who are too scared to actually like rebel in some ways. Like for me personally, like I'm a pretty good kid. I don't like getting in trouble. So I would rather read about other people like rebelling from things than do it myself.
I see. I agree. Yes. We all have that phase, and it's a bit like us adults when we read murder mysteries. Probably.
Yeah.
It's a sort of outlet, Can't murder your colleagues and so on, but at least you can either write about murdering people or reading about it. Most definitely. Since last time, there has been, like I said before, a lot going on, a lot of writing, a lot of promoting your books. You are still, like I said, independent. Have you tried since we last spoke to get a contract, or is it completely out of the question for you, thinking that you are best served with staying independent?
I think for now, I want to like stay independent mainly so I can just build that platform all on my own and really learn a lot of lessons about marketing. Because really, it's much harder to get a publisher if you're like a nobody rather than you're someone who's like already an established author. I do think there are some books coming up that I'm interested in querying. I don't know when yet, but it is something I'm getting closer to.
Mm-hmm. And did you also, I don't know, participate in some sort of writing workshops, be it in person, online? No.
Not really, no.
Not really. Yeah. And what about the feedback you get? I mean, attending book fairs and so on, like you have done, and also probably through social media. What is the feedback so far?
Honestly, most of the feedback has been like overwhelmingly positive. Like it's been really great, especially with each book, to see how the readers enjoy them like more and more. I'd say the book festivals can be very scary because, typically it's not necessarily feedback I'm getting from the people that come up to my booth as much as just people who are like, they're either like, oh, this is really cool, I'm glad you're doing this. Or there's the people that are like, this is ridiculous, you're not the author, find me the author. The book festivals can be very, like, problematic, but I love doing them so much. But it's like, there are so many people that just come up and are just like, will just start like ridiculing me or like grilling me. But online, the feedback is extremely positive and extremely helpful. And it's just always, it's one of my favorite things is like getting reviews.
And you said learning about marketing. I mean, that's the hard part. I mean, often for writers, writing is not the hard part. I mean, it is, but compared to doing all the other stuff, this is still the easy one, the easy part. I mean, the amount of time you spend on marketing It's incredible.
I spend almost as much time on marketing as I do writing.
Yeah.
I post I make social media posts all the time. I have these really long marketing spreadsheets explaining everything I'm gonna do. And honestly, it's one of the most difficult parts is actually getting that book in the hands of readers. But it's also one of the coolest parts is when they're finally reading it and they're finally leaving reviews. So I'd say also overall it's so fun to just experiment with so many different things and watch the sales go up. But it is definitely one of the most difficult parts of the whole process.
Yeah, not just for you, also for the adult ones. Also for the people
Yeah.
who are with the publishing house, which is interesting because quite a few authors we had on our show said, they are traditionally published, but it has changed because in the past you got the impression that if you have a publisher, they do a lot of things for you. Now, authors have to do a lot of things for themselves, not just authors like you who are independent.
Yeah, I think most authors now are finding that they have to do a lot of their own marketing, and that can be so scary for a lot of people. Honestly, when I started, it was terrifying for me. I'm like, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And really, it wasn't until recently that I actually really got I really figured out how to effectively market.
Mm. And what about your workflow? Coming back to your writing, you need a workflow for your marketing these days. Like you said, it's taking up a huge amount of time. And what about your workflow as a writer? How has that also developed over time? And what about your workflow as a promoter of yourself, of your books? I'm quite sure if you are adult authors can learn from you.
So first off, with writing, my workflow is very much, I write every single day, and I'm always writing and I'm editing a book. And usually I edit around twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I actually have a backlog where I have I just published a book, and then I have another book on standby that I'm waiting to announce in November. And then I think it's going to come out a couple months. And then I have another book I'm currently editing right now. And I also have a lot of, books that I've finished that are in different stages. For example, whenever I finish a first draft, I let it sit for a while I figure out what I really need to do while editing. And then I also have some books that maybe they're in their second or third round of editing and I'm just taking another break. Or I have some that I'm just completely powering through and doing all the rounds of editing at once. And then, in terms of promotion, I do it all myself. I try to keep track of everything. I have a spreadsheet for all my podcast interviews, and I send a ton of emails, all the time. But really, it's just super fun, and I really enjoy doing it, which is really, the important thing, because, promoting myself is actually kind of fun.
I see. And what about your most critical readers? What do they say about your development as a writer?
I think the most critical reviews can always find something wrong, but also I notice the reviews are less and less critical as I keep going. If you look at reviews from I remember my favorite review, there was one from the Nightmare of Zaldalin that was the author is too mean to the characters, and I didn't like how the book ended on a cliffhanger. But now they're starting to be oh, well, I wanted the book to be longer, or I thought that, this was slightly confusing. So they're getting a lot nicer, I think, as I keep going. And also the occasional review that's maybe not so great. It's a lot easier to kind of handle now than it was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
When I got my first 4-star review, I cried and I was oh my gosh, no, this is awful. I was 13 in my defense, but I was oh no, this is the worst thing ever. Why couldn't it have been a 5-star? It really was not that bad. At all.
Or rather not read the reviews at all, maybe,
Yeah.
Well, cliffhangers. Ending a book on a cliffhanger, authors do that occasionally.
I love cliffhangers.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? And you're waiting for the next one as a reader. And you will read it, of course, most probably. And there's also the question of, you said editing, you do it yourself.
Yeah, well, I have someone who, I have an editor, but I do most of the rounds of editing myself, and I do have someone who reads through it and proofreads and looks for plot holes and works through the complicated parts of the plot with me.
But the editor is not family. It's a professional one. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, better that way. And
Yeah.
you're so good. Because usually, family and friends, it's great, it's wonderful, but you need the opinion that is most helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the things you would want to hear, you would like to hear, but the ones who help you as an author, of course. And you have touched a little bit on a few things, but now, after all this time, after writing all those books, I mean, who am I kidding? You are the most prolific ones I've really met. I mean, given your age, I mean, when you are my age, you can build your wall with your books, just like this one. What about your advice? I mean, you can give advice, like I said, for your workflow as an author, for your workflow as a marketer. And I'm sure you have more advice to give. Let's hear it. What about some advice for other young authors, or not even young authors who want to start writing? What would be your advice now?
So whenever I hear people like, oh, I really want to start writing, but I don't know where to start, my biggest thing is like, just start. Just write. I recommend that if you don't feel ready to jump in and write a whole novel, then like write a short story. Try to like come up with some characters and maybe write like stories with these characters, or maybe give them a backstory, like create like these original characters, and that's super helpful. And really just find ways to start creating things. And you could practice with like multiple different things. You can write some short stories that focus on like the setting or like some sort of like world you've created. You can do some that focus on the characters, and really just keep practicing. And then if you do feel like you want to start writing a novel, then go for it. There are so many different ways you can approach it, whether you just start writing or you just like try to heavily plot it out. Really just figure out what works for you, just brainstorm and just jump into it. That's the best advice I have. That's what I did, is like I tried not to overthink it, and I just went into it, and here I am.
Not overthink it. So that's one good advice. And just do it. Just get started with it. And what does your work space look like? I mean, what I mean is, you have this wall where you put on your Post-it notes, or do you put them on your table or your computer screen? Or also the question now, what kind of program do you use? Just Word or anything else? What else can you help us with as aspiring authors?
So a lot of my notes are actually just on my phone. I do actually have a whiteboard in my room where I have some brainstorming for the book I'm writing right now. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, really, a lot of it is just like I write wherever I can. So sometimes I like going to like coffee shops and writing there, or I like writing like sometimes at the park, sometimes at home. So really, I just take my laptop everywhere with me, and I just write like wherever I can.
Good advice. I also have to ask you this, since again you've written a lot of books and different genres. Is there at the moment something you would never write about or include in your books?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't want to write anything that's like problematic or harmful to like any sort of group of people. So of course, like I would never do that, but that's also, kind of like a no-brainer. So really, I don't know, like I'm open to writing like a variety of different things, and really like whatever interests me and whatever I feel like would make like a really good story.
Is there a genre, since you said you like jumping genres and including different genres in one book, is there any genre you are absolutely not interested in?
I have no idea. Like, potentially no. I think, like, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of, like, the really, like, gory horror books, so I don't think I would necessarily do that. Like, anything that's, like, extremely graphic or inappropriate in, like, any way, at least at this point. But otherwise, like, not really.
Okay, now the most dreaded question we all get asked sometimes when we have a job interview, and this is not a job interview, but where do you see yourself in, let's say, 5 years' time?
So in 5 years, of course, I will be in college, but also I'm really hoping that I will have a very stable and successful career by then. And I don't know, like a film adaptation would be cool. Like, the sky's the limit. So really, I just see myself basically the same person I am now, but with a lot more success.
Well, I keep my fingers crossed. There's a lot of potential. And since you said a film or TV series adaptation, would you like to try your hand at screenwriting, do you think?
I have written a couple screenplays. I don't think they're very good, but it's such a new thing to try to get used to. But I have the book I just published actually originated as a screenplay. And then over the summer, I went to New York for a screenwriting class, and that was so cool. The screenplay I wrote was very funny. So I definitely think it's something I'm interested in, but I wouldn't want to like write screenplays over novels. Like I would want to do both.
And since you have participated in a workshop for screenwriting, a few writers have, or some writers have, and it is indeed reflected in the way they write their novels. Do you think it also influenced you in writing your novels?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. One thing that was interesting was before I started writing novels, I was actually starting to get interested in like writing screenplays, and they weren't properly formatted at all. They were very bad. I don't even really count them as like screenplays, but I was trying to write screenplays. So then when I actually started writing my novel, like a big critique when I actually started editing it was like, parts of this really do read like a screenplay. So I had to go back and really learn more about writing like the proper descriptions and everything.
They also say, sometimes those authors also say that it helped them with the dialogues.
It definitely helped me with dialogue a lot. Dialogue can be so tricky and really getting it to sound like natural. But when you're writing a screenplay, it's like you really just have to think about it, and you have to kind of imagine it in the form of like a movie, where there would necessarily be more like natural dialogue. So really now I think I have significantly improved when it comes to dialogue.
And would you say that you are also a more visual writer, meaning that you said you dreamt about the plot and the characters? Would you also say that, because I have experienced that and I've only written, let's not mention that. That you have to see a scene in your head, like a film, like a scene from a movie, and if you haven't, what you put on paper doesn't flow, if you know what I mean.
I kind of it depends. Like some scenes I can just start writing without even really thinking about it. Other times I do try to imagine it a couple times over and really see okay, well, what do I want happening here? And that can be so fun. Like I'm a big daydreamer, so I do really like to kind of just imagine everything before I write it. Sometimes even when I'm not writing at all, I'll just be imagining the scenes and figuring out what could happen.
Okay. You said you would love to see your at least one of your books on the big screen, on the silver screen, or as a TV show, Netflix or so on. And which book would you love to see as a feature film the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have a couple different answers to that, depending on I don't know, how I'm feeling. I think first off, okay, I can't give one answer. I think Hello Pets in Heaven would make a really good movie, but also I think my book You Won't Know Her Name would be a really cool movie as well, and it would definitely be very, I don't know, it would be very I feel like it would be successful. And then also, but I really think it would be cool to see my book Never Dying on the big screen, but I think that would have to be a TV show because it's a long enough book that it would very much take away from the story to condense it to an hour and a half to 2 hours.
And suppose you get your contract and you can be part of the process of getting all the actors and actresses. Who would you like to play your characters? Any preferences? Or who can you see as a certain character?
I had all of the fan cast written down, and now I don't know. Really, I'm not picky, so but also I can't think of anyone specific.
Okay. And would you like to be involved? I mean, I'm not sure who said that. I mean, which author said that? Because when he was interviewed on a TV show and they were talking about the adaptation of his book for the films, and he said, and the interviewer asked him of being involved in the whole project, and he said, no, I just sell it to them and then walk away as fast as I can, and let them do whatever they want. What is your opinion on that?
I know it's really hard, but I would like to be involved, and I think it would be really cool to really have at least a little control over what happens. I think it would be really cool if I was a screenwriter and then I could really write the scenes I wanted to happen. Of course, that's very tricky, but also I would feel most comfortable with that because then I can really give my characters like the betrayal and give the story like the betrayal that I really want, rather than leaving it to someone who, wasn't inside of my head during the writing process and really doesn't know the story like I do.
Good point, absolutely. And you have already touched quite a few times upon your plans, but what is next? Talk us through.
So next, I have a couple more books coming out. I'm really excited because I finally have like a really solid like backlog. Actually, I've always had a really like good backlog, but now I actually have fully edited books on standby, so I can actually start to release books at a bit of a quicker pace. So I have one book coming out in, I think, December, and I have another book coming out, I believe, in, I don't know when yet, March, April, sometime I think in the spring. And then hopefully that means that I'll have another book out in the fall, and then maybe in the winter again, and then it just keeps going.
Incredible. And you also have a feline supervisor that also helps, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's always helpful. And Shanti, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Ooh, we've covered a lot. I don't think so.
Okay. Then let me thank you for making time, for joining me again without the teacup, but still, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.